Welcome back, Life Science learners. Let's continue with our lesson. A recap of what we're doing today. We're looking at nutrition, and earlier on we've spent some time looking at the basic concepts around nutrition. We looked at why nutrition is important, and we looked at some important terms. The list of terms were extravagant, they were long, but however they are important, and hence I remind you to go back and to look at those. Let's move on with our lesson. Now we're focusing on the parts of the digestive system. It's important that when you learn any section, such as the alimentary canal or the digestive system, that you understand the location of an organ, its function, and a brief description of the organ. And essentially that's what we're going to look at now. So we're going to look at the pathway of food as it moves through from the mouth all the way through to the anus, and we're going to try and identify the part, its structure, and its function. So let's get straight into that. So as I mentioned, we need to have an overview of the process of nutrition. Again, nutrition has 5 major processes. The process of ingestion, which is taking in the food, digesting the food, which would be both by chemicals and by physically breaking them down, which includes chewing. And as I mentioned, we then need to absorb all of those simple monomers or building blocks and take them into our cells, where they are then put together and assimilate. Assimilate essentially means to put together the building blocks based on what the body needs. And remember that, guys, when you consume a protein, whether it's a plant protein or an animal protein, the building blocks of both of these are simple amino acids. So the body breaks these down into the simple monomers or basic building blocks, which are amino acids, and then it takes them into the cells and converts those amino acids into specific proteins that the body needs. And that is what assimilation means. And so it does that with the carbohydrates, where it breaks them down into the simple monomers. It does that with our fats, and it arranges those based on what the body needs when physiological processes occur. Right. And then finally, the process of releasing what is not needed by the body or egesting them. Right. So again, it's a good illustration to show that process of what happens. So mechanical digestion occurs during digestion. Then the pieces of food are broken down using chemical digestion, as we mentioned there. We then see that the processes of these smaller molecules moving into the cells is referred to as absorption. And then finally, they are assimilated based on what the body needs to make what the cell uses. And then again, the undigested material is removed through the body. And that's essentially the pathway that food has to move through and the processes in the body. Right. It's important that we unpack what the organs are. There are 2 major groups of organs which make up the human digestive system. We refer to them as the alimentary canal, which is consisting of basically organs through which food will pass through. These include the esophagus, the stomach, the small and large intestine. We call this the alimentary canal. We also have organs that are associated with the alimentary canal called accessory organs. So accessory would essentially refer to things also associated with the digestive system. They may have other functions, but they're also associated and accessory to aid the process of digestion. So these accessory organs aid digestion, but do not actually contain food. And this can include the salivary glands, pancreas, liver, and the gallbladder. These organs, again, food does not physically pass through them, but produce substances or contribute to aiding in the process of food being broken down in the alimentary canal. It's important that when we look at the alimentary canal, we know that from the point that food enters to the point where it is digested, we refer to that as the pathway of food along the alimentary canal. Right. So here's a very intricate diagram that has both the organs of the digestive system or the alimentary canal along with organs that are associated with it. So as we go through them, it's important that when you have a diagram like this, that you look at the overview of the diagram, identify the parts, and then use that to unpack each part and their function. So let's start with the mouth. So the mouth is the organ in which food enters or is brought through during ingestion. We've got teeth in there, and we've discussed the structure of teeth in the past, and we looked at the composition of the different teeth and how they play an important role in chewing and the mixing of the food with saliva and breaking that down physically. So in the mouth you've got teeth, you've got the mouth cavity in which the food is mixed up with saliva. And saliva is produced by the salivary glands, and these are present in the body, and there are 6 pairs of salivary glands underneath the tongue and further up on the side of your cheekbones. Okay. The food then passes through into the pharynx, which is an opening that allows for food to enter the esophagus. The esophagus is a tube that connects the mouth to an important organ called the stomach. It is in the stomach that the process of chemical digestion continues. And so we have the stomach, which is a muscular bag in which the food mixes with all the enzymes in the stomach to start the process of chemical digestion. In the background of this, we have a leaf-like structure called the pancreas, and that plays an important role in, obviously, the production of enzymes for digestion, as well as production of hormones. We then move from the pancreas and the small part of the small intestine, which is called the duodenum. So we start off with the small intestine that moves through and opens up into the large intestine. The small intestine consists of 3 parts: the duodenum, the middle jejunum, and the last part that connects to the large intestine called the ileum. Okay? We then find that connection between the ileum and the colon is present here with a little structure that is remnant of an organ that we had in the past. And that little structure there is the appendix, which is not labeled here, but that is the first bit of the large intestine. The large intestine is made up of different areas, and we call that the ascending colon. Again, that's the part that moves up. We have the transverse colon, which moves across, and then we have the descending colon that further carries the waste products down. And then finally, the digestive system ends with the rectum, with the anus being the part at which the food is then released, or the undigested bits are released. Further up, we need to talk about the liver, which is this triangular shaped structure, which has on it the gallbladder. I know it's a bit difficult for you to see in red, but as we move through this, I will change the color of my pen. Right, so let's look at each part and their function. So when we talk of the mouth cavity consists of many parts, right? So when we talk about it, we have the teeth which are present, and they're basically there to break down and to grind the food. And that we see significantly important in chemically allowing the food to be able to digest faster. So the more we chew our food, the better the chemical digestion takes place. Essentially, it means that chewing the food breaks down the food into smaller particles so that the process of chemical digestion becomes much more efficient as food moves along the alimentary canal. We also have the tongue, which is a muscular organ that allows for the food to mix with saliva, and that facilitates the easiest swallowing of food. The mouth also consists of a hard and soft palate, which forms the roof of the mouth. So the roof of the mouth, as you look up here, that hard part in which you often can touch and feel, that's the hard palate, and further back we have the soft palate. We also have 3 pairs of salivary glands, and these release saliva, which again contain enzymes which chemically break down your carbohydrates. So the first process of chemical digestion starts in the mouth, where the salivary glands produce an enzyme called amylase, which starts the production of enzymes to digest carbohydrates. And that's an overview of just the mouth. We then move from the mouth into the pharynx and the esophagus. So when we look at the pharynx here, and then we look at the tube that carries down the food to the stomach, we call that the esophagus. So after food is swallowed, basically it's now called the bolus. So that little ball of food that is chewed up into this round ball which is mixed with saliva is known as the bolus. It moves through the pharynx, which is a tube which takes it to the esophagus. The pharynx is a common tube that allows for air along with food to pass through. Just in front of the pharynx we have an opening called the trachea, which takes air down into the lungs. Behind the trachea we have the esophagus. What separates the opening between the trachea and the esophagus carrying food down into the stomach is a flap called the epiglottis. And the epiglottis is a little flap that prevents food from moving into the trachea. Okay. From there the food moves down to the larynx, where there is a cartilaginous flap, as I mentioned, which stops the food from going into the trachea. Food then moves down into the esophagus to the stomach, and it is pushed along the way by a process called peristalsis. And peristalsis is an important process which we will discuss in detail in a little while. Okay, then we move on to the stomach, and if you go back to where the food has come through, it moves from the esophagus into the stomach, and there is a little valve here that allows for food to move in, as well as a valve at the bottom end which allows food to leave the stomach. In the stomach you'll find that the food then is mixed, or another word for mixing is churning, and it's mixed with strong enzymes and digestive juices that allow for the breakdown of protein. So in the stomach we've got gastric juices and enzymes specifically called hydrochloric acid. And you would have heard of hydrochloric acid as being a very strong acid, and essentially it's an important part of the digestive system which helps in protein breakdown, but also serves an important mechanical barrier that allows for the destruction of pathogens and germs that may enter our food. When that food mixes with the enzymes and the digestive juices, it is now called chyme. And so we find that that mixture of gastric juices with the food and the enzymes from the stomach is called chyme. The stomach has two sphincters or valves, as I said. These are pointed out here at the opening between the stomach and the duodenum, as well as the opening between the esophagus and into the stomach. And these muscles basically close and keep both the openings to the stomach closed when food is being digested. So essentially it allows for food to enter into this muscular organ, and it closes up and it contains the food for a little while until that churning and mixing occurs, and then it allows for the food to move through. Finally, we look at the small intestine, which consists of three regions. It has the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. And if we focus in on this, that's the first part, which is the part that connects to the stomach. Then we've got the middle part called the jejunum. Again, it's quite folded and coiled. And then the last bit, the ileum, which connects to the large intestine. The jejunum is the middle portion which we discussed, and the ileum is the part that connects to the large intestine. The small intestine on the internal surface has got transverse folds that are lined with microscopic villi, and these villi basically are on the inside that increase the surface area for enzyme activity. The large intestine essentially consists of three parts. You've got the ascending colon, so it moves up. The transverse colon moving across. Food then moves down. The descending colon, where it is temporarily stored in the rectum. And then it ends off with food being released through the anus. Guys, I mentioned earlier on that we also need to discuss the accessory glands. And so as we wrap up, the accessory glands, again, where the salivary glands in the mouth producing saliva, the pancreas, an important organ that produces enzymes as well as hormones that play an important role in regulating the blood sugar levels. The liver and the gallbladder, again, are important glands that produce bile and release the bile, and also play an important role in removing waste products and excess amino acids. We also know that bile has a number of functions in the process of digestion, which we will look at in detail, from aiding in emulsifying fat droplets to neutralizing acidic fluid that comes from the stomach into the small intestine, and it also acts as an antiseptic to help destroy some bacteria or pathogens that might enter along with food. And so, as we wrap up, it's important that we look at this as an overview of the digestive system and look at each organ and their function, and as well as to note the pathway that food moves through. Well guys, that's a wrap for this segment. We've just looked at the organs. Trust that you're able to identify organs and know their locations. Let's have a little comfort break, and when we get back, we can look at the further processes of digestion. Welcome back, Life Science learners. Let's continue with our lesson. A recap of where we are. Today we're focusing on nutrition, and we've discussed already the process of nutrition. In our segment now, we're going to focus on the process of ingestion and digestion. What does ingestion mean? It's important for us to understand how this happens and where it takes place. And then we will look at the process of digestion and what that means in terms of food physically being digested. We will look at the chemical process of digestion along with the mechanical process of where food is broken down. Right, so as I mentioned, ingestion. We often refer to us as, let's go and ingest our food. No, we don't actually say that, nah. We say, let's go and have a meal, let's eat. And that is essentially in reference to food being introduced into the mouth. So, the next time you're having a meal, you can say, well, I'm ingesting my meal. What does that mean? It means the process of taking food into the body through an act of eating. The question that I have to you is that, do all organisms eat? Well, if you don't have a mouth, how do you consume food? Well, let's remember that not every organism has a mouth through which it takes in food. Some of our unicellular organisms absorb food through their surfaces. We've discussed in the past how an amoeba will engulf its food and ingest the food. So a mouth is an adaptation in much more developed organisms for ingesting food. But not all organisms have a distinct mouth when we talk about the process of ingesting food. Right, so the large molecules found in intact food cannot pass through the cell membranes. So we will say that food needs to be broken down into smaller particles so that animals can harness the nutrients and then the organic molecules. The process of nutrition is to be able to bring in nutrients into the body. But remember that nutrients are often in complex states when we consume food. And so that needs to go through a process of being broken down into the most simplest monomers or building blocks that then can be absorbed. Right, so ingestion, once in the mouth, the teeth, the saliva, as well as the tongue play an important role in a process called mastication. I mentioned this word before. Mastication is essentially the chewing of food. It's a complex word that describes the process of chewing. And that prepares the food into a ball of a ball that is softened with saliva of the food mass that then moves through. Mastication or chewing is extremely important because it aids in the food being broken down, especially when it comes to consuming fruits and vegetables, as these have indigestible cellulose, and these coats must be physically broken down in order for us to release the nutrients. Now guys, we don't have the enzyme cellulase to break down some of the plant material, and hence chewing the food allows for the nutrients to be physically released from within the cells. So remember to chew your food well. That helps you to further increase the digestion process, but also it allows you to maximize the nutrients that you get from your food. So when your parents do ask you to eat slow and chew your food, there's a lot of significance in that from a biological perspective. So remember that fact. So what happens during the process of digestion? Again, digestion refers to breaking down the food. This process can occur either mechanically as well as chemically. So let's look at mechanical digestion. The food is physically broken down into smaller fragments by the acts of chewing and churning and segmentation in the intestine. So what that means that there is a chemical process of digestion, but there is a mechanical process that we must refer to. Chewing the food breaks the food down. When it moves into the stomach, there's also the churning of food with enzymes, and that churning you often see sometimes, and you hear your stomach grumble, and that's the mixing of the food with the enzymes. That's a mechanical process, guys. And then when food moves into the small intestine, it continues a mechanical process of digestion where it is mixed and it's pushed along, and that process is all regarded as digestion that is mechanically assisted. Let's go back to chewing food. As I mentioned, it allows us to break down the food by the grinding action of our teeth. When food is swallowed, guys, it moves down, and the epiglottis that opens between the trachea and the esophagus prevents the bolus, which is that ball of food, entering the trachea, while the uvula, which is the flap that hangs from the upper part of your palate, that prevents the bolus from entering the nasal cavity. So sometimes when you drink fast, you find that sometimes you can actually get the water up into your nasal passage. It is the uvula that actually stops the water or food moving up into your nasal pharynx. Okay. The bolus then moves down the esophagus through a process called peristalsis. Okay. The mechanical digestion is a physical breakdown of the large food particles. We do not alter the chemical structure, but what it does is that physically increases the surface area so that more surface area is available for the enzymes to start breaking down smaller particles. And that is the idea behind chewing our food. Right, and we discussed the importance of teeth and how they are found. So we've got the teeth that help to bite the food. We've got the molars and premolars that play an important role in the physical process of chewing. The process of peristalsis is an important process. Food has to move through the digestive system, and this refers to the rhythmic contraction and relaxation of the muscles along the alimentary canal. I'm going to very quickly show you an image of what I mean. So guys, that's the bolus that's moving down the esophagus. We note that there are muscles that contract, whereas these muscles further ahead relax. So the blue arrows point to the contraction and the green arrows point to the relaxation. So when these muscles contract, it pushes and opens up the esophagus, allowing for the food bolus to move through, while further down below the bolus, the muscles relax. And this movement of contraction and relaxation here allows for food to move through this tube. And so we talk about this important process of peristalsis allowing you to be able to digest your food even if you were standing on your head. So guys, the last bit of the chemical or the physical process of digestion is churning. And churning again is the mixing of the food with the enzymes in the stomach. And that's an important process where the food spends quite a bit of time in the stomach being churned and mixed with the gastric juices before it moves into the duodenum. Again, that is an important process of preparing the food for the next process of digestion. And as we wrap this segment up, guys, let's have a little break, and when we get back, we will look at the process of chemical digestion of food. So see you in a bit, grab some snacks, and when you get back, we will digest those with chemical digestion. See you in a bit.